to represent Washington State's 7th Congressional District. And if we can just have quiet in the back there. Thank you so much. I'm proud to represent Washington State's 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I'm here today with leaders from a number of different organizations that have been very important on the ground. Those include the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, includes CARE Washington, it includes the Japanese American Citizens League and our longtime leader, Diane Narasaki, as well as the National Iranian American Coalition has been very helpful and working actively on this issue, and a number of other organizations that have been part of a coalition for some decades now to ensure that we protect the constitutional and civil rights of all Americans and all people in the United States. We're also going to be hearing from shortly one of the individuals who was detained. Nega is with us today and will speak as well. But I wanted to start by saying that the Trump administration's escalation, reckless military escalation with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani has brought us to this place, but even before that, has brought us to this place with the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA, with the failed strategy of maximum pressure, I put that in quotes, and now with an unauthorized assassination with no approval from Congress to go to war that has brought us to a very, very dangerous place that puts our U.S. troops in danger and also puts the entire region and decades of diplomacy at risk. More than ever before, it is urgent that Congress immediately take action, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which I co-chair, has taken a formal endorsement for floor action on a couple of bills, and we are working with leadership to make sure that this week Congress can reassert its constitutional obligation to approve any sort of use of military force, to withdraw any military force that's being used in the region right now, and to prevent the United States from going to a war. Our office got word of what was happening from CARE, NIAC, and from some other groups on the ground early yesterday morning, and we've been working since then to get to the bottom of what is happening. And what has been clear to me now in speaking with, our office has spoken with a number of people who were detained, and in speaking with the groups that are here, is that there were certainly people of Iranian American descent, almost all, as we know, U.S. citizens and permanent residents, who were subjected to, I wouldn't call it just additional scrutiny, because they had their passports taken away, they were not allowed to leave, so they were held in some form of detention at the Peace Arch in border crossing in Blaine, Washington, and it appears that that was as a result of some sort of directive that we are trying to get to the bottom of what that was. So I understand that CBP has said that no such thing occurred, but it is difficult to believe that when you listen to the multiple accounts of what happened, and you will get to hear that directly. It is also difficult to believe that this was just a question of short staffing at the border, and that is what led to these delays, because in fact there were clearly many people being processed through, and the only people that seemed to be pulled aside and held back and detained in some form and fashion were people of Iranian American heritage. You will hear a little bit more, but the work that we have been doing in our office has been to try to get to the bottom of exactly what was told, what was directed by CBP to our border officials in Washington State. The notion that this was all because of a pop concert that Iranian Americans went across the border to attend, and therefore that's what caused the delay, doesn't make sense. And you'll hear from Jorge Barón, the executive director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, about what he saw and experienced. But certainly this started before people started coming back from the pop concert. My deep concern about this, having been an activist right after 9/11 and having worked on the secret detentions, deportations, additional scrutiny that were brought to communities right after 9/11, going to the Muslim ban, when so many of us went to the airports immediately, and now this, is that we continue to have a very skewed notion of what it means to be a U.S. citizen, what it means to be a permanent resident, and what it means to have constitutional protections, regardless of your citizenship status. And this appears to be another attempt to target and isolate a community that very much is part of our fabric, our social fabric. And so the fear that these policies have brought and the discrimination that we appear to be once again veering towards has deep roots in our history. And I'm grateful that we have Diane Narasaki with us to talk about that as well. So with that, let me turn it over now to Masay from CARE Washington Coalition, which has been so vital in its work on the ground, starting from the very beginning on Saturday night and bringing this forward as a national issue that we all need to be paying attention to.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Congresswoman for convening us all here today and for her staff's diligent work on this issue since Saturday evening. My name is Masih Fuladi. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, Washington, and I am also an Iranian-American dual citizen. Late last Saturday night, we started hearing reports around 10 p.m. that there were Iranian-American citizens being held in Blaine. Upon getting these reports, we were actually able to get in touch with 3 families. Many of these families were at the border crossing as early as 10 a.m. on Saturday, and most of them were not released until after midnight. We heard of first-hand accounts of detentions lasting between 8 to 11 hours. All of the 3 families that we assisted were American citizens. Many of them had dual citizenship, but the children in those families were born in America, raised in America. Some had never even been to Iran. We heard tragic and troubling stories of what would be akin to loyalty questions being asked of these individuals. We heard stories of them being told to list the names of all of their Iranian family members, give them their emails, turn over social media. And this is extremely troubling in this time. Having gone through the Muslim ban in 2017 and seeing the impact on Iranian Americans there, the chaos that we were seeing on Saturday night and early Sunday morning was very similar to that. I'm very thankful for having the support of organizations like NERP and Jorge Barón and others who were able to go there, go to the border crossing early on Sunday morning. And we saw that with time and with pressure, thanks to the assistance of many in the media, those wait times had decreased from 6 to 12 hours to a much more manageable but still questionable 1 to 3 hours. And what we heard from CBP with their flat-out denials of, first of all, people being questioned or there being some kind of directive is counter to everything that we saw when questioning the families we were in contact with. We heard that families were essentially asked questions by lower-level CBP officers and then later called up and said, oh, we have some other questions that were sent to us. If there was no directive, if there was no instruction from somewhere outside of Washington State, where would they be receiving these communications from, and why would they be waiting for directions from others to make these reports and questions? With that said, for all the Iranian Americans and Iranians who are listening, we know the typical pattern of what is to follow. If you are contacted by the FBI, if you are contacted by CBP or the Department of Homeland Security, make sure to have a lawyer present before any conversations with those individuals. It's paramount to understand that as an American citizen, you have the rights of every other American here, and we want to make sure that you are upholding those rights. And we have attorneys at CARE, at organizations like NIAC, NERP, and others that we will provide to you all pro bono. So please be in contact with us, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Masay. And now let me turn it over to Jorge Barón from the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, who traveled to the border and has just been such a long-time champion for immigrants in our region.
Thank you. Thank you again, Representative Jayapal, for your leadership on this issue. Again, my name is Jorge Baron. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And I also want to thank Masi and Care Washington for the work they've done on this issue. As you heard, we started receiving reports late Saturday and early Sunday morning about the situation at the border. We decided it was important to have somebody on the ground at the port of entry in Blaine, Washington. So I made my way up there, arrived a little afternoon on Sunday, yesterday. And when I arrived, the waiting area, the port of entry in Blaine, Washington, which is where people both go for secondary inspection as well as if you're a pedestrian walking by land, where you would be inspected, was fairly full. There were probably about 40 or 50 people total there. And there were some families who were kind of in benches areas who clearly have been waiting for some time there. When I was able to make contact with 3 different families, all of whom had people who had been born in Iran. Some of them had young children who had been born in the U.S. 2 of the families included U.S. citizens. One of the families was a lawful permanent resident couple and their young child. And they had all been sent to secondary without any explanation of why this had happened. It's important to note, I think, I've also seen the denials from CBP about this occurring, and they're saying that nobody was detained. I think it's really important for people to understand that these families were not free to leave. So, they're in this area, and yes, they're not being held in a locked room per se. They're not in a cell. But you're in this secondary area where your passports have been taken away from you. You're not free to enter the U.S. And even if these folks wanted to somehow go back to Canada, which they shouldn't because they're permanent residents and U.S. citizens, and so they live here, they couldn't because they didn't have their passports with them. So they were not free to go during this time. And again, they were subjected to questioning that they shouldn't have. This was not a situation where people didn't have their documentation, they couldn't verify their identity or their citizenship. They had U.S. passports literally on hand. There should be no reason why they should have been subjected to further screening. So talking to people there, people have been held. So the people that I actually made direct contact with only experienced a more limited detention time of as much as 2.5 hours, but they reported that people that they had seen before I arrived had been there even that morning as much as 5 hours. So to me, and talking to other families that we've talked to since then who experienced this, and of course you'll hear a firsthand account of what happened, it is clear that there was a pattern of subjecting people who were born in Iran to additional questioning and being held, in my opinion, detained because they were not entitled to leave this location until they experience additional questioning, which we believe is completely inappropriate. We believe it was illegal for this to happen, and we expect that CBP will provide answers as to why people are subjected to questioning. The last thing I will add is CBP has said that this had to do with staffing, and I just want to refute that completely, because it was clear to me when I was there yesterday that other folks who were coming through who did not appear to be from Iran, who just came in and showed their passports, were processed very quickly. The only people who had to wait extended periods of time were the people who were born in Iran. So if there were staffing shortages, that should have impacted everybody equally, but that was clearly not the case that was happening yesterday, and from all the reports that we've heard that happened over the 36 hours. So thank you again for being here and for getting this information out. And again, we're demanding answers from this agency.
Thank you, Jorge. Our next speaker, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to speak out. We have been in touch with a number of people who are afraid to say anything. And I think, again, we should just remember these are U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and they are feeling afraid. And so your courage today, I think, is an example for so many across the country. So I now introduce Nega Hektani for her version of exactly what happened.
Hi, I'm Nega Hekmati, and I was one of those people who passed the border on Saturday night. We passed the border at 12 p.m. and we were in the border for 5 hours till 5 a.m. We were 2 families, and overall 3 adults, 4 kids. All the adults, we were born in Iran, and our 4 kids were born in US or Canada, and we all had US passports. So as soon as they realized that we were born in Iran, they lead us to the office, and they held us there for 5 hours. They asked many questions, many personal questions, like our Facebook accounts and like my parents' full name, birth date, and my uncles who are in US. They asked about my cousins, everything, all the detailed questions, private questions, even some of them. And then we wait there for a few hours till they release us. Technically, we couldn't sit even in our car. We had to stay in that area. They had our car keys. They had our passports. And we asked them if we can go in our car because my kids need to sleep, and they said no because you can't start your car, and it was too cold. So we end up sitting on the benches over there. Our kids were so anxious. They didn't go to sleep because they were afraid that if they sleep, we probably they're gonna take us to the jail, and they wake up not seeing us. That was not right, I think. And also my daughter, the comment that my daughter was giving me is that please don't talk Farsi, don't speak Farsi. Maybe they wouldn't know that we're Iranian, and they won't help us or put us in jail or something like that, which is not okay. And I'm here, I'm as an immigrant, I'm used to these stuff, unfortunately, but I'm here today because of my kids. They shouldn't experience such thing. They are US citizens, and this is not okay, and it shouldn't be okay for them to help there. And watching their parents are anxious, and like all the people are all in the same boat with them, are all Iranian, and that's why they are all their help. So yeah.
And you are a US citizen.
Yes, yeah. We are US citizen as well. So this is not right, I guess.
How long have you been in Canada?
We'll get to questions in just a minute. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And now let me ask Diane Narasaki to come and speak from her long wisdom of leading movements and working on behalf of all of us, and certainly the Japanese American community.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal for calling us all together to put a focus on this incident. I'd like to thank Jorge and Masi and Nega for being here as well to share their experiences and their thoughts. I'm here today not in any organizational capacity, but as an American citizen. In 1942, as we know, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which enabled the forced removal and incarceration of 120,000 people, men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry to inland concentration camps for the duration of World War II. The majority of the people removed and incarcerated were American citizens and their immigrant parents. None were ever charged with a crime nor convicted of a crime. Their only crime was that of their ancestry. So it is with deep sadness and outrage that I hear what is happening now with the Iranian American community, who similarly are being targeted on the basis of their ancestry. We are American citizens, and I call on all of us as American citizens to stand up for the rights of our fellow citizens and their immigrant parents and community members. When people were in the concentration camps during World War II, they were subjected to a loyalty question. And the types of questions that were being asked of the people who were being detained at the border had a chilling effect to me. It reminded me of those questions. They were being asked about their political views and their allegiance. it doesn't matter what their political views are. If they are here as American citizens, and if they are immigrants who've been allowed into the United States, it simply is their right as American citizens to hold the views that they have a right to hold. In 1942, no one, or I should say very few people, stood by the Japanese American community as it was being subjected to this un-American treatment. Today, I hope we're looking at a different situation. I call on all my fellow citizens to stand up with the Iranian American community to ensure that their rights and the rights of their immigrant parents and community members are respected. We need to defend their rights to defend our democracy. In defending their rights, we defend our own rights as American citizens. Let's not slide down that slippery slope. Let's stop this right now and recognize that American citizens have the rights of American citizens regardless of where they were born. And let's respect all our human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much. We're going to open this up for questions, but I just want to point out a couple of things that I think are important from what all of our speakers said. Number one, Nega is a U.S. citizen herself, and everybody in her car was a U.S. citizen, and they had already been processed for Nexus cards, and so they had with them their Nexus cards. As you know, that's a special screening that people go through in order to be able to go through expedited processing at the border. So when she said her children are U.S. citizens, I didn't want you to think that she herself is not a U.S. citizen. All of them were U.S. citizens. Number two, every account that we have now had from Nega directly, from Jorge, from others, is that the vast majority of people, if not everybody, that was being held in this room was of Iranian American descent, heritage. If there was a Caucasian American family who didn't appear to be of some other ethnic descent, if they were brought in, they were quickly processed and released. So this is not a situation of just one or two. This seemed to be a directive to pull aside anybody of Iranian American descent, born in Iran or otherwise affiliated. And number three, that people were not just held for simple secondary questioning for an hour or even 15 minutes, that we have accounts of Nega's account of 5 to 6 hours. The account Masih talked about 12 hours. Most of the people, until Jorge Barón got there and had a legal presence there, and I think then the processing time went down a little bit, but until that time, it was very lengthy screening with no ability to leave. So whether you want to call that detention or something else is up to you, but the core fact of the matter remains that this appears to be some sort of directive that even the Border Patrol agents themselves talked about just following orders. So there was some sort of an order here, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it. So I know you had a question for Nega, so I'm going to let you come up to the...
Yeah, Nick, I just wanted to know a little bit more about how long you had been in Canada, if you were there for the concert or something else.
We were not there for concert, but we went there Tuesday night, and we were there for a few days.
Mentioned
for skiing.
That you had gone just before.
And yeah, for Christmas we were there too, and we go to Canada pretty often, once every month, and we never had such a problem. On Christmas we were there for a few days as well, and we didn't have such a problem when we were entering U.S.
Were you
So
there for family reasons, vacation, or
skiing and visiting family. Yeah.
And were you in the Nexus lane?
There was no Nexus lane open at that time, but yeah, we had our Nexus cards.
Could you just clarify once more? I'm sorry. So you got there around midnight, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who was in the car, and how old are your kids, if you could clarify?
My husband and I were in the car with 2 kids. My son is 8 and my daughter is 5.
And could you just go over the questioning a little bit more? I know you talked about it a little bit. How long were you questioned, and then how long did you wait? And what
I don't know if you're familiar with the process, but when you enter to the U.S. with your car, you don't get off your car. You'll go past the kiosk, the booth that the officer had. So when you pass with your Nexus card, usually you wave your Nexus card before you pass that booth, and they don't even ask you any question because they have all the information on their screen when you wave your card. So we usually pass without even asking any questions, or the only question usually they ask is that, where is home for you? And we'll say U.S. Kirkland, something like that, and we'll pass. But that night when we wave our cards, they stop us at that booth. They ask us, where were you? We said Canada. What was the purpose? We said we went there for skiing. So the first point we mentioned that we're not there for concert, if the concert was something that triggered the problem. But yeah, we weren't there for skiing. Our ski racks was full of skis, so that was obvious. And the second question they asked was that, where were you born? My husband said that my wife and I were born in Iran, and my kids not. They from Canada and like U.S. So they lead us to the office after that.
Does it get out of your car?
They lead our car to the parking lot, and they ask us which spot to park. They got our car keys, and they gave us an orange paper. And all the Iranians who came, they all had that orange card with them, with our documents. We went there, we stand in a line, and we talked to an officer. And from there, they asked many questions and everything. They held our Nexus cards, and we wait there for 5 hours. After 5 hours, they gave us back our cards. During that 5 hours, we asked them if we can go in the car. They said no, because you can't start your car. There were no food or drinks there. There was just one fountain, water fountain. First they said you can't go to your car. Then they said no, you can go if you want. We said we need to get some stuff for our kids, they're hungry. So they let us go in our car. We grabbed some stuff and we came back. We sat there for 5 hours.
Do you want to talk about the form?
Yeah, they asked the question, the form. We didn't fill any form. It was on the computer. The officer asked the questions, we answered. And it was about like name, full name, our school, education, where did we go to high school, college, and my parents' full name, date of birth, my sister, my brother. And the officer was very helpful. To make it less complicated, he tried to fill one form for my husband and I. And so all the detailed questions were more from my husband. He went back and he came again and said, they didn't let me to. I tried to fill one form for both of you to make it more simple, but it's not probably, they didn't accept it. I don't know what he was referring to, what was it? But he went to the back room and came back and said, we can't fill one form for both of you. So each adult who were born in Iran has to have his or her own form. So yeah, and they fill another form for me, and they ask me about my Facebook account, and what is my Facebook account, email, phone number, everything. And apparently the questions they asked me was not similar than my friend or even my husband. So, and they asked about my husband's military, which is mandatory in Iran, 2 years mandatory military service that he did. And he said he did it in police department. When they took the form, or I don't know, uploaded the form or something like that, when they came back, they asked a few more questions about his military service, because they said, if it's military, why didn't you do it in army? And he said it was something that I did it and it was mandatory. It was not I wasn't in the place to tell where I want to go, so that was it.
And Niga's husband is a computer engineer who
in
works at Microsoft.
Yeah, in Microsoft.
You said you travel up there frequently. Have you ever had any experience close to this? In all those
Nothing,
trips?
nothing. We used to travel with visa before we had the status in U.S., and it was back then in George Bush presidency, where that all Iranian had to register. It was something similar to that, but not that lengthy. This was nothing close to any other.
I'm sorry, one of your children was born in Canada and one in the U.S. Just to
Yes.
clarify. And you
Yeah.
live in Brooklyn, is that right?
Yes.
And do you work?
Yes, I'm an interior designer. I have my own company. Yeah.
And
What's going through your mind during this as you're waiting there for 5 hours and you've never had to deal with something like this?
That was we were anxious, of course. And imagine I'm an Iranian. And besides this incident, I'm worried for my family and my friends that I have in Iran with all the news I've heard. And all of a sudden, when you pass the border and they held you for 5 hours, this is unacceptable. And that was very unfortunate, I guess.
Were you yourself asked any, there was reference to some people being asked like loyalty type questions. Were you or your husband asked anything like that?
No.
How were your children during this ordeal for 5 solid hours through the middle of the night? Were they frightened?
They were very frightened. Like my daughter and my friend's daughter, they couldn't go to sleep because they were very anxious. They were very scared that if they go to sleep, they may take us to the jail, and they wake up and see we're not there. And my daughter was telling me, please don't speak Farsi. If you don't speak Farsi, maybe they don't take you, or something like that.
What made you decide to speak today in front of all these cameras?
I told you, yeah, because of my kids. It's not okay. And for me as an immigrant, I'm used to it, unfortunately. But for my kids, it shouldn't be okay. And I'm afraid that's a slippery slope. And I'm afraid if this going on, if there's any war or something like that, my kids will pick in school. They're going to get teased for being Iranian or speaking Farsi even. And this is not okay. My kids should be proud of their ancestors, their heritage. They should be proud of, and they can speak Farsi fluently. So this is something important for my family and I to have this culture and this heritage here, even in the U.S. And we choose this country because of that, because we thought we're free to have whatever we want, being Iranian and U.S. citizen at the same time, and be proud of both of them. But this is not right, I guess. That's. I'm still proud of being Iranian as well as U.S. citizens. I'm proud of both. But I need to show my kids to be proud of both as well.
To be clear, are you a dual citizen or just U.S.
citizen? I have 3 citizenship. I have Canadian, Iranian, and U.S.
Did you used to live in Canada?
Sorry?
Did you used to live in
Yes.
Canada?
Yeah.
How long have you lived there?
8 years.
And one other thing you might want to mention is your friends were in the car behind you. So again, it wasn't just your family; it was another family.
Another family as well. They live in California, and they don't have Canadian status, but they were U.S. citizens as well there.
And this room you were in, how many other Iranian Americans were there?
I would say about 20-25 other families.
Did you see anybody that wasn't Iranian being questioned?
No, while we were there in that 5 hours that we were there, we saw one family, white family. I don't know where their background was, but they came there for a few minutes and they left. And one more comment that I have is what the CPS told us, that it was short staff, which I think it's
DHS.
Yeah.
CBP.
Yeah. Sorry, CBP mentioned was that they were short staff. They were not short staff. They got all our information, and it was like 2 p.m. after us. 2 group of like 5 people came, and there were no more people. 5 a.m. there were nobody passing the border, so they got all our information, and after like 2 p.m. they had nothing to do. They had just wait till they get the results from somewhere else, because they were waiting, and they had a timer on. I don't know what was the timer, but every time that the timer beep, they used to go, they went there and check the computer, and obviously because when they check the computer, sometimes after they check the computer, they came back to us and call one name that has been released. So they were waiting for a result as well.
This is 2 a.m. you're talking about, in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
And what was this room exactly where you were kept?
It was a big room, waiting room kind of thing. There were 4 benches in the middle, and around the room were the desks of the officers.
Did they talk about any kind of a directive or anything that might be coming from somewhere else to instruct them what to do?
Probably, yeah, because they had a form in front of them. They asked many questions, but apparently they filled the form on their computer when they were asking us, and after they were done, they called us again, and they had more questions, because apparently that was not sufficient about my husband's military service and about the form that they filled for both of us. They came back and said, we've tried to make it more simple, but unfortunately we can't. We have to fill another form for you as well.
And they mentioned something about following orders.
Yeah, and we asked them if this is a one-time thing, because we pass this border pretty often. They said this is an order that they had. They don't know anything about it. They wish they knew anything, but they don't know any further processing, if there's any further processing. We told them, my daughter asked the officer, how long would that take? When are you going to release us? And he said, I wish I had the answer to your question, but this is out of my hand as well. We have to wait and see when they will be done with this information. And this is not something that we can answer.
Are you or your family considering pressing charges? Are you doing anything like that? Getting a lawyer?
We haven't done anything yet, but we may.
You mentioned being anxious earlier. What other feelings were going through your heart as this was going on?
Just, that was very unfortunate. And we used to live in a country that freedom was not a very, very important thing. That's the reason we moved to US, we moved to Canada. And we were so happy when we moved from Canada to US. We were so happy that we did this, because we thought that we felt the freedom more even in US compared to Canada. But that was so unfortunate. Like, even for our friends in Canada, they always tease us that you left us. Why you're moving? Why did you move to US? And we said, we feel more freedom there. We feel that this is part of we're part of a melting pot, because here in US we get a chance to have friendship with many people from different backgrounds, and we were very grateful for that. And that was very unfortunate that we saw that even our Persian friends from Canada, they're teasing us, see, they're not accepting you as well. Why do you like to go and to live in US? And that's not right, I guess. I don't know what to say.
How long have you lived in the US?
6 years now. 7, more than 7 years now. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've put her through a lot of questions, and we are so grateful. One of the things Nega said to me last night and we were talking about whether she might want to tell her story publicly, was that the CBP's denial of what happened was also a piece of wanting to come forward, because this did happen. And I just think it's important that we recognize that this is the same agency that also denied that family separations was happening. DHS was the same agency that denied that family separations was happening. And so I think we are just deeply grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nega, I do want to ask one question that's really easy, because otherwise you're going to hear it 30 times from people in the room, is how to spell your name.
Okay. Nega. G-A-H.
And the last name is Hekmati.
Hekmati.
How old are you again?
I'm 38. That's a very version.
That was the hardest question.
That was the hardest. You should have.
Only journalists get away with asking that.
Have you heard of any other locations along the border?
Only anecdotal at this point. We've heard some anecdotal stories from San Francisco and Los Angeles at the airports, not at the borders. But we haven't been able to confirm any of that. So it's only anecdotal at this point. At SeaTac, we have some friends in the room, including from the port, who has been in close communication with us. We are not seeing any big patterns, but we have, I think there was a report of one person at SeaTac, Iranian American also, who was subjected to additional scrutiny. But I know our friends at the port are working to make sure that they reach out to everybody, all the officers who are there, and working with the new CBP chief there to determine if anything else is happening. So we're keeping close touch with them.
So what are you doing to, what action are you taking in terms of, are you contacting the administration? Are you contacting the president? What
Yes.
what specific steps? And then the second part of that, are there any legal actions planned?
Not at this point on the legal actions, but that, sometimes takes longer. But we did receive we were corresponding directly with CBP yesterday through my DC office, and we did receive a similar denial to what the CBP put out on Twitter and in their statement, that social media posts that CBP is detaining Iranian Americans and refusing their entry into the U.S. because of their country of origin are false. We weren't claiming that people were being refused entry. We were asking about the detaining, and I think Jorge made this point that whether you want to call it detention or not, if you take away somebody's keys and you keep them for up to 12 hours, that is certainly a form of detention. So we are continuing to work with them. I have a letter that we're working on with the House Judiciary Committee staff to send to CBP. I know Congresswoman Del Bene also has a number of constituents in her district, and her district director was here for the meeting we just had previously. We've been keeping our congressional delegation apprised of what we're doing. But we will try to get the information first to determine exactly what was happening. And as you know, this administration has not been forthcoming with information. So it's difficult to get that information. It's also difficult to trust that information.
So have things returned to normal now, as far as you know, in terms of people being questioned?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from what I saw personally at the end of the day yesterday, things had returned to normal. I think we're obviously monitoring the situation to see if there's anything else, and I think we do want people, if they experience any situation, or people who are thinking of returning, for example, from Canada right now, who might be concerned about it. We certainly don't, think that people have the right to return. And if they do encounter any additional questioning, we want to make sure that they're reporting that. One resource to report that is the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network's reporting hotline, which is 1-844-RAID-REP, RAIDREP. And so people can report that they're being held, and then we can deploy resources in those situations.
How does CBP normally respond when somebody like yourself comes into a situation like that and attempts to intervene?
Well, so it was interesting. I mean, the first thing I did when I showed up was to try to contact the CBP officials. They referred me to one of the supervisors, and I explained who I was and why I was there, because they usually only usually there because they're either a secondary screening or because they're actually walking in from the border. So they were a little confused as to why I was there, but I explained who I was, and I had my bar card, explains who I was, an attorney. And after consulting, they said that I could remain in the waiting area, but they declined. I wanted to be able to be there, present for questioning of people, U.S. citizens who wanted me to be present for that. They declined that. They took the position that there's no right to counsel even for U.S. citizens. during this questioning. I disagree with that position. I think that it's one thing. I mean, if we're talking about as you mentioned at the kiosk, right, at the sort of toll booth, I agree that at that point people wouldn't have a right to have a lawyer present at that moment. But once you're putting U.S. citizens in secondary screening and questioning for extended period of times, I believe people should have the right to counsel. CBP officials denied that position, but they did allow me to be there so that I could talk to people.
And you've reminded me that one of the things I'm doing this week is reintroducing my Access to Legal Counsel bill, which would allow for that. That was introduced right after the Muslim ban that I introduced with Senator Kamala Harris at that time. But I'm reintroducing that in the House this time because it's clear that we are putting a number of people in terrible positions with no access to legal counsel, and we're so grateful for the work that NERP does every day. But we need more direct access, not Jorge Barón going up and trying to get in to have a table out there with a sign that says free legal help. We actually need that to be a part of our system.
And if I can add one more
thing. Can you tell the number of 150 people that you believe were questioned at length, and what you think, why this is happening, your estimation?
Let me ask Mase to quickly say his comment, and then I'll respond to that.
To the point of CBP, Saturday evening when we start getting reports, we contacted CBP and tried to speak with an officer on duty to say that we had potential clients that were asking for our legal assistance. And we've seen in the past at CTAC, the CBP may cooperate. I've seen that in LAX too, at least giving us a little bit of information or detail, or at the very minimum allowing us to speak to the watch commander. CBP in Blaine was not interested in doing that in the least, and historically that has been the case in Blaine. For the past 3 years, we've seen especially harsh treatment of Iranian and Muslim Americans as they cross the border. We actually had a lawsuit that was filed in federal court because an imam was held there for over 5 hours. The other thing to mention is people asked if things had gone back to normal. I think they had gone back to normal for Iranian standards, which is like 1 to 2.5 hours of being held, but they hadn't gone back to normal for American citizens who, again, oftentimes aren't in secondary for more than 15 to 30 minutes. And then really the last thing I want to mention before turning over to the Congresswoman, from the reports we received, at the height of the busiest that it was, there was about 60 individuals in there, and the number started to die down as we got later into the evening with around 40 around 10 p.m. And then by, again, midnight, there was around 25 people that we know. But obviously, there's people always filtering in. And the last thing I'll mention in terms of timeline and the concert was happening on Saturday evening. So much of the people who are coming back were actually coming back for winter vacation, Christmas break. They wanted to get back to school on Monday morning. Many of those people missed flights to other parts of the country because of that. But to say that this was because of the concert was ridiculous. We know that some people around 9 p.m. were turned around because there just wasn't enough room in the waiting area and they didn't want to accommodate any more people. And they potentially may have been from the concert. But again, that doesn't seem very verifiable from our end. Thank you.
In the total number, we've heard numbers from 60 to 200 total.